Hello everyone, welcome to the Module 2 Nutrition in Action lesson. We're going to do things a little bit different this time. You're going to watch this video, and as I go through the slideshow, a few questions are going to pop up. You will be able to answer those questions to earn your points for the Nutrition in Action lesson, and that will show up in the Moodle Gradebook. These are the module learning objectives that will be covered in Module 2 Nutrition in Action. This is a fun module because I think the activities are really practical and a fun way for you to apply the information that you learn. So you can also find these module learning objectives in Moodle too. Alright, and this is our outline for the presentation. You have already learned a little bit about the macronutrients and micronutrients through the lesson on MyPlate and the basic nutrition lesson. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about how these macronutrients and micronutrients are used in the body to promote normal growth and development and also improve performance. We're going to talk about the dietary reference intakes and learn the categories of those DRIs. And we are also going to learn about the role of nutrition in academic performance. There's going to be another activity this module where you will learn about the role of nutrition specifically in sports performance. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, but you're going to get most of that in another assignment. So first up, we're going to talk about the dietary reference intakes. If you see DRI written in this class, that means dietary reference intakes. So the dietary reference intakes, or DRIs, were created to help identify the minimum nutrition requirements for specific nutrients. And the goals of the DRIs is to establish that recommended nutrient intake to reduce nutrient deficiencies, but also to improve long-term health and well-being of a population by reducing the risk of chronic disease through nutrition. You've probably heard of the DRIs before. Most likely you've heard of the RDA or the upper limit. But what you see here are the 4 types of DRIs, or dietary reference intakes. So we have the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA, the estimated average requirement, or the EAR, AI, which stands for adequate intake, and then UL stands for the tolerable upper limit. So the next few slides are going to describe what each of these 4 types of dietary reference intakes are. What I want you to keep in the back of your mind is that we use these 4 categories of DRIs to help to establish those recommended nutrient intakes to promote health and reduce nutrient deficiency. So each of these is used sort of at different times and depending on how much we know about a specific nutrient, which I'll explain a little bit in just a second. So the first DRI that we are going to discuss is the estimated average requirement, or the EAR. So what the EAR does is it declares the intake value of a specific nutrient that is estimated to meet the requirement of half of healthy individuals in a group. Okay, so you see this chart here. All right, so what we know is that there is a healthy population. All right, we know that the healthy population has a lower intake level and a upper intake level. So when we want to determine in kind of an estimate of a recommendation, maybe we don't have a whole lot of information to pinpoint a specific nutrient intake to maximize health, but what we can do is look at a population of healthy individuals, see their average intake, and we can put that right in the middle and say, all right, this is the estimated average requirement because we have this group of healthy people. Their between this lower level of intake and this upper level of intake. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 50%, take that middle, and this is the amount of that specific nutrient that we're going to recommend. That is what is the estimated average requirement. The RDA, or recommended dietary allowance, is another category of the DRI. What the RDA is it declares the average daily dietary intake of a specific nutrient that is sufficient to meet the nutrient requirements of nearly all, so 98 to 98% of healthy individuals in a group. So what you see here is the same chart that I showed you just a second ago on the slide for EAR, but we have the RDA over here. So we know that the healthy population, we look at this healthy population again for a specific nutrient. We know that of the healthy individuals, the lowest consumption of that specific nutrient is here. And we know that the highest consumption of that specific nutrient is over here. So the RDA looks at 97 to 98% of the highest of consumption of that nutrient in that healthy population. So the RDA is most useful whenever the EAR is undetermined. So if we can't find that like happy medium, that middle ground right here with the EAR, we can't set that RDA because we don't know what the middle is. So like what we're looking at here is this graph right here showing us a healthy population. Okay, so we know that the lowest intake of that specific nutrient among the healthy population is right here, and the highest intake of that healthy population for that specific nutrient's over here. All right, so the middle is that estimated average requirement, but we can't determine that RDA if we don't know where this EAR stands. Okay, so we have to know the low and the high to establish the estimated average requirement, and we have to have the RDA, we have to have the estimated average requirement to set the RDA. So takeaway here, RDA tells us what is sufficient to meet the needs of almost everyone in that healthy group. Next, of the DRI categories is the tolerable upper intake level, or the UL. What the UL does is declares the highest level of daily intake of a specific nutrient that is likely to pose no risk of adverse health effects to almost all individuals in the general population. So, we know that there, for specific nutrients, there are lower levels and there are upper levels. So it could be that a specific nutrient, if overconsumed, could have harmful effects. We know that as intake of a specific nutrient increases above the established taller upper intake level, the risk of adverse effects increases. So the upper intake level is going to be over here. All right, so adequate intake, which we'll talk about in just a second, is going to be that sweet spot. But the upper intake level is where if we continue to increase consumption of that nutrient, the risk of whatever adverse health outcome is going to increase. So we don't want to go beyond that tolerable upper intake level. All right, and the last category of the DRIs is adequate intake, also known as the AI. So the adequate intake level is a value that's based on observed or experimentally determined approximations of nutrients and how much should be consumed by a group or group of healthy people. So the adequate intake, which you see here, is a wider range. So we are going to use the adequate intake whenever this RDA can't be set. Okay, so the RDA is really one of the highest level of recommendations. So if you recall, the EAR, or the estimated average requirement, remember that meets the needs of 50% of healthy individuals. That's an estimate, okay? It's literally in the name, estimated average requirement. So we're taking the high and the low consumption of a healthy population, and we're saying, all right, 50% of the people are eating this much and they're healthy, so that's our EAR. The RDA goes further to say that this is going to meet the needs of 97 to 98% of the population. If we can't establish the RDA because we don't know the estimated average requirement, we can give adequate intake. So maybe we have a little bit of research that says these populations eat about this much of a specific nutrient and they are healthy people. So we are going to set right now this adequate intake level of a range, and until we can do more extensive research to determine the estimated average requirement, and then the RDA will use this range for adequate intake. So just a summary of the dietary reference intakes. Remember, there's 4 categories. The RDA, EAR, and AI all suggest minimal nutrient requirements. They can be considered tiers in confidence and reliability of available data, just like I was saying. So some of them are more exact and some of them are more of an estimate until more data can better represent the consumption of that specific nutrient and how it affects health. The upper limit, on the other hand, suggests the highest amount of consumption to prevent the risk of adverse effects from excessive nutrient intake. So each of these categories is based on life stage groups, and what that means is that the specified DRIs for a 2-year-old are probably going to look different than those that are specified for an 80-year-old, and vice versa. So these are going to be individualized specifically to life stages to help meet the needs of people at those particular points in time. So, we have DRIs, but what do we really do with them? Research is what helps to inform those DRIs, but we need a way to sort of put them into a package that lets people know how to actually meet them and achieve them. So, the dietary guidelines for Americans are important for us to learn about because they kind of give a image to all of the data that is the DRIs. So they put it into a more relatable and visual context so that these goals can really be met. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans, or DGAs, provide evidence-based food and beverage recommendations for Americans. And these recommendations overall aim to promote health of Americans, prevent chronic disease, and help people reach and maintain a healthy weight. The cool thing about the DGAs is that public health agencies, healthcare providers, and many institutions rely on the dietary guidelines for recommendations and strategies. The DGAs really have a significant impact on nutrition in the United States because they form the basis of federal nutrition policy and programs. So these can really help to create the foundation for programs like WIC and the SNAP program for communal feeding for the elderly. So the DGAs kind of give us an idea of what sort of health and nutritionally, what's kind of the gaps in nutrition and health among Americans and how we can fix them. The DGAs also guide local, state, and national health promotion and disease prevention initiatives. So, for instance, if I guess kind of the equivalent of like a behavior would be smoking. So, say there was an equivalent for lifestyle behaviors, and that the dietary guidelines for Americans are for food, and the behavior guidelines for Americans was for lifestyle behaviors. So say the behavior guidelines initiative found that smoking, there was an increase in the amount of people who were smoking, and they also found this data that related smoking to cancers. So that group could put out recommendations and say, we need to get people to smoke less because it causes all of these conditions. So what the DGAs can do is identify that, hey, there's a large portion of our population that is suffering from overweight and obesity, or there's a large portion of our population that's suffering from type 2 diabetes or heart disease. Well, what kind of initiatives would come from that sort of guidance? So they may have more programs and initiatives created at the local, state, and even national level to help mitigate the increase in type 2 diabetes or heart disease. So that could lead to policies that promote the calorie labeling at fast food restaurants, or at the restaurants that you dine at, they have to tell you the calorie or offer nutrition information. But even also education programs that are available to people. So finally, the DGAs inform organizations and industries of what Americans need and maybe also what they'll be interested in. So for instance, if sodium is a nutrient of concern determined by the dietary guidelines, manufacturers may be more interested in selling products that are lower in sodium because maybe Americans are going to be more interested in eating a lower sodium diet. So the reason, you see things that are like high protein or lower carbohydrate, all of these things, they don't just manifest, manufacturers and food scientists know like where people are going because of things like the dietary guidelines. They know what consumers are going to want. So they stay up to date with those types of things too, and it can really influence the product market. So a little bit of history of the dietary guidelines. They were first released in 1980. But every 5 years, HHS and the USDA come together to review, update, and republish the dietary guidelines. So in 2015, the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines were released. So we are actually due this year for the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines. But basically the DGAs evolved to address the pressing public health concerns and nutrition needs of specific populations at that time. So they're going to change typically a little bit every single time that they're republished, just based on the needs of our country. Traditionally, the dietary guidelines focused on people 2 years of age and older. But, some scientific breakthrough showed that dietary intake from birth and even a mother's diet during pregnancy can have a really lasting effect on not even only the child's health during childhood, but their health into adulthood. So one of the main updates in the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines is that for the first time, it's going to offer guidance for infants and toddlers from 0 to 24 months. because originally it was only 2 years and older, as well as give guidance for women who are pregnant and lactating. So that's, pretty important that we are finally getting some guidance for individuals who weren't previously acknowledged in the dietary guidelines, which is great. So again, we haven't seen a release of the updated dietary guidelines for the 2020-2025 issue, but we do have their sort of like key statements. And for the most part, they've stayed, or what they're focusing on, other than adding those life stages, they're pretty much focusing on the same prevalent issues in American life, which is issues related to overweight and obesity, chronic disease, and also food insecurity. So what they found for this cycle of dietary guidelines is that over 70% of Americans are or have overweight or obesity, and they identify that the most concerning aspect of this is that there is a drastic increase among the young ages. And the reason that they are so concerned by this is that the behaviors related to overweight and obesity during adolescence and childhood, those behaviors are likely to be carried into adulthood. And overweight and obesity during childhood and adolescence really sets the stage for chronic diseases. They also state that overweight and obesity are important because the overweight and obesity are highly associated with increased risk in diet-related chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. But finally, which some people, need to fix this. Some people kind of have a hard time understanding that a society can really have an issue with overweight and obesity while simultaneously having an issue with food security. So an important, distinction to make is that food security does not mean just overall access to food. Food security means access to healthy, nutritious, affordable food. So what the 2020 to 2025 DGA committee says is that food insecurity and lack of access to that affordable, healthy food continues to be a problem, and that 37 million people, which includes 6 million children, are food insecure. And one of the biggest issues with this is that food insecurity disproportionately affects households that are low income, that are Black, Hispanic, or single parent homes. So remember, the point of the DGAs is to create the foundation for public policy or nutrition policy, programs that provide assistance to people, whether it's through monetary assistance to purchase nutritious food, or the provision of education to help people make lifestyle changes and make healthier choices. So since we don't have the updated DGAs, we're going to take a look at the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines. I think one of the big points to make is that the dietary guidelines aren't incredibly prescriptive and specific, only in certain instances. So what they do is they make comments like a healthy eating pattern includes all of these great things, while a healthy eating pattern limits some of these things. So they're not saying that to be healthy, you have to eat these things, and to be healthy, you have to never eat these things. The whole thing about dietary advice is that any changes or plans have to be sustainable. If something isn't sustainable, meaning that somebody can't continue that practice or that diet forever, it's not sustainable. So we have to teach people how to make healthy changes that are small, that can snowball into lifestyle changes. So a healthy eating pattern includes variety of vegetables from all subgroups, so all of these colors, legumes, and starchy vegetables. Fruits, especially whole fruits. So rather than fruit juices, the whole fruit is going to provide all of those good vitamins and minerals, but also fiber. Grains, at least 50% whole grains. Dairy that is low fat or fat free, as well as fortified soy beverages. Protein foods in a variety, as well as oils like olive oil and vegetable oil. At the same time, we want to limit some of these foods that we know can have detrimental effects to our health, such as saturated fats, trans fats, added sugars, and sodium. So this should sound pretty familiar. Okay, we basically have described MyPlate, and the reason for that is that the function of the dietary guidelines is to create that foundation for our programs like MyPlate. So MyPlate doesn't just, there isn't like a MyPlate board that just says, hey, we're going to make up all of these, all of this guidance, and it's, we're just pulling it out of our back pocket, and this is what we're going to tell people to do. No, the people who create the MyPlate are utilizing the dietary guidelines to disseminate education and guidance that is relatable and easy to understand. So, key recommendations that are quantitative, so that they have like a specific number, are provided for several of the components that should be limited. So instead of telling people that they need to have X amount of grams of whole grain carbohydrates, we tell them that they should consume grains because they are healthy for you, but try to consume at least 50% of whole grains because those have the most fiber and can really help your health overall. But the ones that we want to tell people to limit, we want to be a little bit more specific because that can help those individuals meet those goals. So these components are particular public health concern in the United States, and the specific limits help individuals achieve healthy eating patterns within the calorie recommendations. So the quantitative recommendations that we tell people to limit are what were included in this A Healthy Eating Pattern Limits list. So we want people to consume less than 10% of calories from added sugars. We want people to consume less than 10% of calories from saturated fats. We want them to consume less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. And if alcohol is consumed, it should be consumed in moderation and only by adults of legal drinking age. So that would be 1 drink a day for women and 2 drinks a day for men. So again, we're looking at those recommendations provided by MyPlate. And remember, we've looked at the food label now, and we know that we can identify the daily value, the milligrams on a food label. So the dietary guidelines for Americans, they help to set those standards, and the food label kind of follows suit. So, for example, this is an older food label, as you can tell. It's not the updated version. So you see vitamin A and vitamin C, calcium, iron, magnesium, and phosphorus at the bottom of this food label. Well, one of the most recent, in the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines, they made that indication that vitamin D and potassium are nutrients of concern, meaning that they're more likely to be underconsumed. So for that reason, those nutrients were added to the nutrition facts panel. So again, this nutrition guidance just doesn't come from out of nowhere. They're based in research, based in the dietary guidelines, which is based on exhaustive research. So these are our key messages of the current 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines. They teach people how to build a healthy eating pattern, cut down on sugars, cut down on sodium, shift to healthier food and beverage choices, and cut down on saturated fats. So the overarching goal of the current dietary guidelines is not to give a big drastic you should eat this and you shouldn't eat this, but sustainable changes, behavior changes that can lead to overall lifestyle changes that can be held on to promote health. So you might be asking, why do we need the DGAs? The big thing is that these recommendations are what other organizations and institutions use to build their own health programs and initiatives. So the DGAs tell us what we should be consuming and tell us how to encourage appropriate healthy weight balance to reduce the risk of chronic disease and to encourage physical and mental performance. So that wraps up the talk on the dietary guidelines. I just wanted to give a brief overview of healthy weight balance and weight management. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about physical and mental performance. So healthy weight balance is important because the DGAs promote healthy weight balance by encouraging the public to consume foods that are nutrient dense rather than energy dense. So remember, a nutrient dense food is a food that has lots of vitamins, minerals, fiber, good macronutrients, but an energy dense food is a food that has lots of calories with maybe not as many of those macronutrients and micronutrients. Or that they would obviously have macronutrients, but the macronutrient won't be balanced and it won't have those good vitamins and minerals in addition to all of those calories. So when we consider weight, we typically use body mass index to establish weight ranges, which you see here. Research shows that the BMI in the obesity range is associated with higher risk of chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. So for these reasons, the DGAs are utilized to encourage healthy weight balance. But how exactly do we achieve that? Weight balance depends on the amount of energy. Energy is the same as calories. So the number of calories that go in, so what we eat, versus the amount of energy or calories that we burn or expend. So if calories eaten are greater than the calories that we burn, so the scale is going to tip towards calories eaten, that is what's called a positive energy balance, and that's going to lead to weight gain. So we have more energy coming in than what's going out, so that would lead to weight gain. On the other hand, if calories burned is greater than the calories eaten, so calories burned is going to be more prominent than what the calories eaten. That is what we call a negative energy balance. We have more energy going out than energy that's coming in, and that's going to result in weight loss. Finally, if calories burned and calories eaten are equivalent, weight is going to remain stable. So this is important because this helps to guide any recommendations that we give to people to help with weight management. It's not, weight management at the end of the day comes out to calories, and sometimes the macronutrient intake is going to be important because those kind of determine the amount of hormones that are going to be released, and sometimes hormones can make it more difficult for people to lose weight. But at the end of the day, what really matters is a calorie deficit for somebody who needs to or wants to lose weight. On the other hand, a calorie surplus is what is required for someone to gain weight. So those are the big pieces for weight management. So moving on to physical and mental performance. Overall, good nutrition has the power to keep our mind and our body working in the best form. So I have several facts here. Feel free to pause the video so that you can take a look at these. But it's pretty amazing how much specific nutrients in food groups affect performance among adolescent and child students. So healthy students are better learners, and schools can influence healthy eating and physical activity behaviors to improve performance of their students. For you guys as future coaches and teachers, anything that you're going to do, you'll have the opportunity to teach your students how good nutrition and physical activity can help them in school and help them do better on their tests and in the classroom. So this often means providing access to healthy foods and physical activity to the students that you interact with. Later on in the semester, we'll talk about ways that healthy practices like healthy foods and lifestyle behaviors can be promoted to your kids, and you'll have the opportunity to create a lesson for that purpose. I'm going to play this video for you.
Exhale. Again, inhale. Exhale. One more time. Inhale. Okay, we're ready to start our day. My name is Claudia Mendoza, and for the past 5 years, I've been working with preschoolers. Child obesity it's a problem in the U.S. and it's a growing epidemic. But what worries me the most is something that could be prevented. 1/3 of kids are overweight or obese. But now as the kids come, I want to do something about it. They're like little sponges that absorb everything. So as much information we could pass them out to them, they learn and they talk about it and they take that to their families as well.
Amelia talks to me about the yoga classes, and she tries to teach me her yoga poses.
I saw the yoga class and it's like, I want to bring that to my classroom too. It's not the yoga that is like concentration. It's yoga for preschool, which is only focused on the stretching. And I also read that the benefits, is about controlling their bodies.
It was nice to kind of boost her ego a little bit with something that she could teach us that we really couldn't teach her at all.
We're gonna leave it in our garden so we could see how they grow and we could eat all the stuff. Gardening and cooking with the kids is something very fun. And it also teach the kids, where the food comes from. It teach the kids, about the importance of nutrition.
Here she's planting a carrot, but at home she's taking care of a tomato plant. One of Miss Claudia's lessons.
If I could share an example of one of the kids, the parents shared with me that, at home he used to drink soda. So now he said, no, I need water because my teacher say I need to drink water. So the family started drinking water as well. He's making an impact as young as 4 years old.
Who's ready for lunch?
They're learning healthier habits at this age. It will stay with them for life.
When we go to the store, she'll pick out fruit that she wants, healthy alternatives.
Top fries. Can't pick up at fries.
I've seen my kid grown, not only academically, but as a person, as a human being, and she's really learning, things that will grow with her, that will make her make better decisions.
The stuff she's learning at school is going to carry on throughout her life.
I think it's important we, as teachers, as adults, as parents, we have to show them. Sometimes we want the kids to read, they have to see us reading. We want them to eat vegetables, they have to see us eating vegetables. We want the kids to exercise, we have to exercise as well. If everybody does just their little part, we could do so much.
I really like this video because even if as a teacher or a coach or wherever you're working, there's going to be some way that you can create an environment that teaches who you come into contact with how to make healthy choices, whether it's for diet, whether it's for physical activity, but really teaching them how it can impact their life beyond, weight. So it's going to help them learn better. It's going to help them be strong and have fun in their classes or in their gym class. So those are the types of things that kids really need and that we need to focus on with them to help promote those positive behavior changes. Okay, so the last topic of this lesson is sports nutrition and injury prevention. You are going to have an activity where you hear from a registered dietitian who is also a certified sports dietitian. So I'm just going to go over a few basics, and she'll talk about much more. So injuries specifically are important to sports nutrition because good nutrition and behavior should be able to reduce the risk of injuries. So how do injuries happen? They can be contact sports, overuse and improper rest, or inadequate nutrition and hydration. But also they could be due to things like risky behaviors, not enough planning to eliminate that risk, or other risky behaviors that take away attention. So we'll talk about the health risk behaviors later on this semester. But we're going to talk a little bit more about how athletes specifically can reduce their risk of injury through nutrition. So adequate rest and hydration are the cornerstones of reducing risk of injury. It's ideal for athletes who are, doing strenuous exercises in competition to have at least one day off per week, and also to take breaks during their exercise bouts. Important for them, of course, to wear proper gear to protect their organs, to promote adequate strength training and conditioning preseason. So it's important that you don't just go and compete. There's a lot of build up to that, and it's not just to make you stronger. It's to make you stronger, to make your muscles stronger, so that you can avoid that risk of injury. Flexibility is the same thing. Having more flexible muscles can really protect your joints as well as your muscles from injury. And finally, knowing your limits, because pain is not a normal thing. Pain isn't gains. If you're in pain, you need to stop, and that's how you should treat your athletes as well. So depending on the sports, some athletes can lose pounds of sweat during a workout or competition. So with that loss of fluid, you're getting a loss of electrolytes, and electrolytes are important because these send signals to the muscles, and that fluid helps to protect the joints. All of that combined is going to increase the risk of cramping, increase the risk of joint injuries, and then also to promote early fatigue during that exercise. So very important that that fluid is replaced in the appropriate manner for athletes. Thirst, by the time that we feel thirsty, our body is technically dehydrated. So you shouldn't just drink to thirst. You should drink all day long, especially if exercising that day and losing significant amount of sweat. A good rule of thumb is for an athlete to weigh before and after their exercise to determine how much fluid loss is present, and then they can properly replenish that fluid afterwards. So, collegiate athletes, professional athletes, this is a standard practice for their team dietitian to weigh them in before and after. I was once talking to the sports dietitian for the New Orleans Saints, and they actually fine their players a significant amount of money if they don't weigh in before and after their workouts. Okay, and really a consistent and balanced diet is incredibly important. So this should resemble MyPlate, and depending on the sport can be modified just a little bit. So all athletes have an increased risk of, an increased need for fruits and vegetables because there's all those vitamins and minerals within fruits and vegetables that help with healing and recovery, and also prevention of injuries. So these are some basic meal plans for athletes. And you can see how the plate changes based on the exercise for that day. So this would show easy training or weight management. So half of the plate is fruits and vegetables. A fourth is lean protein, and a little bit more than a fourth is lean protein, and a good significant portion is whole grains. Then for moderate training, so the intensity is increasing a little bit. You see half of the plates, or almost half of the plate is vegetables. There's still room for fruit over here. It's over by the grains, which has increased. Okay, so our carbohydrate foods are here, taking up 1/3 of the plate, because moderate training means that there's an increased need for carbohydrates. And then lean protein is still the same. Finally, for a hard training or competition day, half of the plate is going to be grains plus fruit. A fourth of the plate is going to be vegetables, as well as lean protein. So one of the big takeaways here is that protein requirements for athletes is pretty stable. I think athletes tend to overemphasize protein, but really carbohydrates are so important to recovery, because if it weren't for carbohydrates, the protein wouldn't be able to enter into that muscle cell to help repair those damaged muscle cells. So carbohydrates really are kind of the key that opens the lock for protein to be able to enter into the muscle cell. So carbohydrates are incredibly important for recovery. You'll learn more about this and some other sports nutrition topics in the lesson that you'll do, or the video that you'll watch of the sports dietitian.